Thank you, Chair. As it is my maiden speech, I believe it's customary to thank the people of Dublin Central who saw fit to send me here. And I do thank you, send you warmest thanks. It will be through the work done in this chamber and also outside it, but I hope to validate that trust that was placed in me by them. I'm also quite happy that the first speech I get to make in this chamber concerns the European Union and our relationship with the European Union. I am, like many in this chamber, a supporter of our position within the European Union. Since we joined in 1973, we've become a fundamentally different and in many ways better society. We've become more outward-looking, more progressive, more confident in terms of who we are. And that's got to become more evident now that our nearest neighbours have departed. And there's a greater responsibility to ourselves to be more assertive, to stand up more for ourselves, to not be subservient, to demonstrate the very best of what it means to be Irish on the European stage. And I'm part of a first generation of Irish people who do consider ourselves European. I think as we approach this new negotiations regarding the European financial framework, I think it's very important that we assert ourselves, that we remember the values and what we hold dear. I believe that oftentimes when we confront these campaigns, they do have to be green jersey campaigns. They're not a time to take shots at each other unnecessarily. But when we have to, we should be able to call out what we believe that we should hold dear. So I think, as my colleague Kearns mentioned earlier, to standing up against the 14% cuts to CAP, that's absolutely essential for ourselves. To be net contributors to the European Union should be, I believe it can be a source of pride for ourselves. We benefit massively from the European Union, so to offer the same circumstances to those of our neighbours who have joined recently, I believe is important. It is also important to remember in terms of conversations around rebates from the more frugal members of the European Union, that rebates are a sad legacy of the British, and I think maybe they should be dispelled as the British remove themselves from the European Union. But it's also in terms of the European Union, and when I think about the European Union, I think about what it was built upon. And the European Union was built upon the ideals of shared peace and prosperity. And if that shared peace and prosperity is not being extended to all, well then it leaves us in a more vulnerable position. The very ideals of the European Union means that we assert ourselves not only in conversations of the economy, not only in conversations about how we allocate resources and about the financial framework, but we assert ourselves in conversations of this union that we are a part of. When members, including ourselves, fail, we should be able to pull each other up on that. And I believe there's a number of examples that we can point to in terms of the union that we're now a part of. And I suppose one of those that strikes the mind at the moment, and that hasn't been mentioned today, is the situation that's going on in Poland at the moment. And I believe it's absolutely essential that we demonstrate solidarity with members of the LGBTQ plus community in Poland who are experiencing the injustice of the fact that 1/3 of Poland is now describing itself as a LGBT plus has exclusion zones. For me, that is absolutely anathema to the union and the ideals of shared peace and prosperity. These exclusion zones mean that in 1/3 of Poland there is a restriction on the sharing of LGBT literature, of LGBT information. On top of that, there has been attacks on members of the community who have engaged in the Pride Parade. We have to be vocal about that. There's a reason that we have cohesion funds. There's a reason that we're committing our shared wealth to building up other nations, but that comes with a responsibility. There are rule of law caveats placed into the charters of the European Union. For example, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, Article 11, freedom of expression and of information. The Law and Justice Party in Poland, who are removing that from the LGBT community, are in complete violation of that. Article 21, the non-discrimination of people based on their sex, on their religion. Again, this is a right not being afforded to members of the LGBT community in Poland. And it's something that if we are to build this union together, we must demonstrate solidarity to people who are not experiencing that piece of Europe, that promised piece of Europe. So we need to be vocal, not just condemning it as the European Council has, as the European Parliament has, actually enforcing it in any way that we can, because it's simply unacceptable. It was a point well made in the chamber several times regarding the migration crisis that is experiencing on the borders of Europe. And I believe the conversations in this chamber that pertain to the migration crisis are really appropriate. Because in Ireland, we're uniquely positioned to talk about migration, the plight of migrants. We are a nation that was built on migration. Throughout our history, when times were bad, we've looked overseas and we've travelled. We've gone to the US, we've gone to Britain, we've gone to Europe and further afield. And oftentimes when we are met there, we are met with hostility. And it's absolutely incumbent upon who we are and our place in the world that when we see injustice happening to people who are fleeing their own homes because of war, because of famine, because of the climate and ecological breakdowns that are happening in the world, that we have to ask that they are met with compassion, with a humanitarian response. And that isn't happening. That isn't happening on the borders between Turkey and Greece at the moment. It isn't happening in the Mediterranean. And we can't close our eyes to that. We have to stand up for those people. There are other injustices happening in Europe. And we talk about the European Union. And we talk about the threats that are facing the European Union. We talk about the rise of the far right. We talk about the climate crisis. We talk about increasing in technology. And that's what's going to mean for our place in the world. But there are other more bread and butter threats facing in the European Union that are very rarely we speak of, and that's the fact that 22.4% of people in the European Union are living in poverty or at risk of social exclusion. A union built upon the very ideals of shared peace and prosperity cannot exist with 24% of its citizens, over 120 million people, are living in such circumstances, such precarious circumstances that mean that they're finding it difficult to feed themselves, to house themselves, to look after their family. If we promise shared peace and prosperity, it must be for everybody, not just the wealthiest cohorts within the union. And that is a fundamental threat to the European Union. And if we believe that other people's poverty has no business of our own, well then I ask you just to look across the water to the Anglesey and to Holyhead and to the ports of Wales, where over 80% of our HGVs and our exports previously went to. Holyhead is statistically the poorest part of the UK, with an average income of just over 15,000. And those people, despite being dependent upon export for their very existence, voted to leave that union because they weren't feeling the warmth of Europe. Poverty, exclusion is a very threat to the European Union. If we believe ourselves to be involved in this, we believe ourselves to be intrinsically connected, then we must be able to acknowledge that and seek to confront it and see it as a genuine threat to the fundamental values that we hold dear. Chair, I'll finish on this point because I've highlighted the injustice that are experienced throughout the rest of Europe, and I do want to say that we have our own injustices here in Ireland also. And in my maiden speech, I do want to acknowledge the documentary that was on Tuesday evening on redress, that once again highlighted the failure that this state is afforded to victims of institutional abuse and incarceration that happened since the foundation of our state. That has to be, whoever takes on the role of Taoiseach, whoever that may be in this country, must fulfil the promises that were made 20 years ago by Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, or in 2013 by Taoiseach Enda Kenny, that we would acknowledge, respect and deliver for people who've experienced those injustices. That has to be a challenge. I'm putting this chamber on notice that this must be the last Dáil where people who've experienced such injustice within our state are neglected. We need to deliver upon those promises. I don't believe we're too far away from the republic that we are promised. I do believe that our partnership, our future is intrinsically connected to the European Union, and I look forward to engaging in these discussions and seeing this chamber as a place of delivery moving forward. Thank you.